welcome to podcast number 5 of the Anything and Everything with R&R. I'm Gaz, and my partner in crime and my co-host.
It's Glenn, aka Bez.
Today's topic is
25 most brutal torture techniques ever in history.
Okay.
Right. Why don't you kick us off, Gaz?
So, number 25. The tub. Known as the punishment of sitting in the tub. The convicted person would be placed in a wooden tub with only their head sticking out. After that, the executioner would paint their face with milk and honey, and soon flies would begin to feed on them. The victim was also fed regularly and would end up swimming in their own excrement. After a few days, maggots, worms would devour their body as they decayed alive. Whoa.
That's horrible.
Gruesome.
That is really gruesome. 24. The brazen ball. Also known as the Sicilian ball, it is designed in ancient Greece. A solid piece of brass was cast with a door on the side that could be opened and latched. The victim would be placed inside the ball and a fire set underneath it until the metal became literally yellow as it was heated. The victim would then be slowly roasted to death, all while screaming in agonising pain. The ball was purposely designed to amplify their screams and make them sound like bellowing of a bull. Wow. Guys, this is going to be very gruesome and, you know.
Okay, 23. The impalement. Given his name, it should come as no surprise that this was the most favoured method of execution by Vlad the Impaler. The 15th century Romanian, the victim was forced to sit on a sharp and thick pole. When the pole was then raised upright, the victim was left to slide down the pole with their own weight. It could take the victim 3 days to die using this method.
Wow.
And it has been said that Vlad once did this to 20,000 people, all while enjoying a meal.
Wow. Isn't Vlad supposed to be Dracula?
Yes.
22.
Yes.
Heretic's fork. This torture device consisted of a metal piece with 2 opposed bi-pronged forks attached to a belt or strap. One end of the device was pushed under the chin and the other to the sternum, and the strap was used to secure the victim's neck to the tool. While the victim hung from the ceiling or was somehow suspended so that they could not sleep, if their heads dropped, the prongs would pierce their throat and chest. Wow.
Okay. 21. Neck torture. Humiliating and painful, the punishment was something of an endurance test where the victim would be hooked into a neck device, either made of metal or wood, which prevented the victim from adjusting into a comfortable position. The cruelty of this punishment lay within the fact that they were unable to lie down, eat or lower their head for days.
God, can you imagine having your head up for days? It's... Number 20. Crucifixion. Principally practiced in antiquity, though it remains practiced in some countries today. It is one of the most well-known execution methods due to crucifixion of Jesus Christ. It is deliberately slow and painful execution where the condemned person is tied or nailed to a large wooden cross and left to hang until they die, which usually takes days.
Okay, number 19. The Judas cradle. Closely related to the impalement, this gruesome punishment entailed having the victim sit on the pyramid-shaped cradle, after which they would be forced down on it by ropes, with the intent of stretching the victim orifice over a long period of time, slowly impaling them. To add to the overall humiliation, the victim was usually naked and the device was rarely washed away. So, if the torture did not kill you, the infection contracted from it would.
That is really, really.
That is gruesome.
That is disgusting. Number 18. Lead sprinkler. Usually filled with molten lead, tar, boiling water, or boiling oil. That stinks to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was used to torture victims by dripping the contents onto their stomach or other body parts like their eyes. Oh.
Jeez.
Using this device, the torturer would proceed to pour molten silver on the victim's eyes, which resulted in agonising pain and eventually death.
Wow.
I would hate to go like that.
Yep. Okay, number 17, Iron Maiden. This torture device consisted of an iron cabinet with a hinged front and spikes covered interior, sufficient enough to enclose a human being. Once inside its conical frame, the victim would be unable to move due to the great number of steel spikes impaling them from every direction. The interrogator would scream questions at the victim while poking him with jagged edges.
Number 16. Coffin torture. The most preferred torture technique in the Middle Ages was known as a coffin torture. This method involved placing the victim inside a metal cage, roughly the size of a human body, hence the name. The torturers were also forced overweight victims into smaller cages to heighten their discomfort. As they hung from a tree or gallows, generally they would be left there until the crows came to feed on their remains. Wow.
Okay, number 15, thumb screw. Though there are many variations of this torture device, the thumb screw or the pillywinks all function the same. They were designed to slowly crush not only the fingers and toes, but larger devices were also used to crush knees and elbows. There is also the head crusher, which could do the same for heads. Its primary intention was to extract confessions from victims, and it was first used in medieval times.
Number 14. Rope torture. A rope is the easiest use of all torture devices, since it is easy to find and can easily be fashioned to inflict a number of terrible retributions. For example, it can be used to tie the victim to a tree, leaving the victim exposed with no way of defending himself from animals or other humans. It could be used to hang victims at the gallows or for entertainment purposes, or ultimately inflicting death. And it could be fashioned to restrain the victim's limbs while attaching the other end to horses, and it would make them run, consequently severing limbs.
Splitting them in part as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, number 13, probably one of the most famous, I feel, the guillotine. One of the most notorious forms of executions, the guillotine was made of a razor-sharp blade attached to a rope. The victim's head was placed in the middle of the frame as the blade dropped, severing the victim's head from the body. Since the decapitation was considered to be an instant and painless event, at least less painful than the other torture methods, it was often considered the most humane method of execution.
Number 12. The rack. Designed to dislocate every joint in the victim's body, it was believed to be the most painful form of medieval torture. This torture device was made out of wooden frame with 2 ropes fixed to the bottom and the other 2 tied onto a handle on top. Once the victim was bound and placed on top of the rack, the torturer would proceed to turn the handle. Eventually the victim would be stretched till his limbs were dislocated. The torturers, however, just to make sure those limbs were indeed dislocated, would continue to turn the wheel until the limbs were completely torn off the victim's body. Wow.
Wow. Okay, number 11, tongue tearer.
Just a quick one. Back in the old days, they were ruthless.
Highly ruthless. Can you imagine if they brought in these to nowadays?
It's barbaric.
Human rights, they wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, but number 11, tongue tearer. Looking like an oversized pair of scissors, it could effortlessly cut the victim's tongue. Their mouth would be forced open with a device called a mouth opener, and then the iron tongue tearer would uncomfortably twitch the tongue with its rough grippers. Once a firm hold was maintained, the screw would firmly tighten and the victim's tongue would roughly be torn out. Wow. Wow.
These are making me shiver.
Wow.
Number 10, rat torture. This has got to be one I hate. Being in an enclosure with rats is torture enough, but apparently this is not enough for medieval times. One of the most sadistic of all torture techniques involved having a cage with one open side strapped against a victim's body. It would then be filled with large rodents and heating element which would be placed on the other side of the cage. The rodents' natural instinct led them to flee the intense heat. In order to escape, they would burrow through the victim's body with fatal results.
They did that in a film. If you know what the film is, put it in the comments.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
It's let's give you a clue. It involves a lot of cars.
It does indeed. And I think it was number 2.
And one of the leads has actually passed away.
Yeah, God bless his soul. Okay, so number 9, the chair of torture, also known as the Judas chair. It was a terrible, intimidating torture device that was added to dungeons in the Middle Ages. Used until the 1800s in Europe, this chair was layered with 500 to 1,500 spikes on every surface, with tight straps to restrain its victim. Made of iron, it can also contain spaces for heating elements beneath the seat. It was often used to scare people into giving confessions as they watched others being tortured on this gruesome device.
And number 8, and this is a famous one as well. Cement shoes. The cement shoes were introduced by the American mafia when they executed enemies, traitors and spies by placing their feet inside cinder blocks and then filling them up with wet cement. Once it dried, the victim would be thrown alive into a river or a deep body of water. That's a very, very famous one, a bit like the guillotine.
Yep. Okay, number 7. This is not a pleasant one for the ladies. Breast ripper. Though women were also subject to many of the torture techniques on this page, this is one that was specifically designed for them. Used to cause major blood loss, the claws, which were often red hot, would be placed on the exposed breast as the spikes penetrated beneath the skin. It would then be pulled or jerked, causing large chunks of flesh to come off with it.
Oh, ow.
Okay.
Sorry, ladies. That is horrible. Number 6. Crocodile shears. Often used to mutilate those who would attempt to assassinate the king, this iron pincer was heated red hot before being used to clamp down on a victim's appendages and tearing them off from their bodies. And as you see in the picture of this video, there's some of the torture bits there.
Okay, number 5, Republican marriage. Besides the guillotine and burning at the stake, this act of torture was employed by Jean-Baptiste Carré during the French Revolution. It is involved binding naked males and females together and then throwing them into icy waters to drown. When the water was unbearable, they would just be run through with swords or bayonets. This was preferred method used to execute nuns and priests during that time.
How did they get away with all this? Well, it's medieval times, isn't it? There was no really laws about, was there? Number 4, the breaking wheel. Also known as the Catherine wheel. This is a torture device used to slowly kill the victim. First, the victim's limbs was tied to spokes of a large wooden wheel, which would then be slowly revolved as the torturer simultaneously smashed the victim's limbs with an iron hammer to break them in numerous places. As the bones were broken, the victim would be left on a wheel to die, or could be placed on top of a tall pole so the birds could feed on their flesh while still alive. This was slow indeed, since it could have taken days before the victims would die from dehydration. Sometimes a coup de grace, blow of mercy, was employed by the ordering the executioner to deal a fatal blow on the victim's chest and stomach to end their agony.
Wow.
Ruthless.
Okay, number 3, Spanish donkey. One of the torture devices during the Spanish Inquisition. This is probably one of the most gruesome of them all. The victim is put astride, naked, on a donkey-like apparatus, which is actually a vertical wooden board with a sharp V wedge on top of it. After that, the torturer would add varying weights to the victim's feet until finally the wedge sliced through the victim's body. Wow. Wow.
I thought a gunshot or a stab was bad, but wow. Number 2, saw torture. In this method, the victim is hung upside down so that the blood will rush to the heads and keep them conscious during their long torture. The torturer would then saw through the victims' bodies until they were completely sawed in half. Most were cut up only up to the abdomen to prolong their agony.
Okay, and number 1, hanged, drawn and quartered. During medieval times, the penalty for high treason in England was to be hanged, drawn and quartered in public. I know it was abolished in 1814. It has been responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. In this torture technique, the victim is dragged in a wooden frame called a hurdle to place the execution. They would then be hanged by the neck for a short period of time until they are near death, hanged, followed by disembowelment and castration, where the entrails and genitalia are burned in front of the victim, drawn. The victim would then be divided into 4 separate parts and beheaded, which is quartered.
Wow. Really ruthless. Well, there you go, folks. There's another 25 facts about things that some people might not know about. But, as I say, if there's anything you would like to discuss or any topics you'd like to see, put it down in the comments below. And also click that subscription button and
notifying bell, ding ding, please.
And as we always say, peace, love, and be lucky.
Thank you.